Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Real Reviews podcast. Hope and pray you guys are having a good day today. Today, we're going to be talking about perhaps one of the most popular Studio Ghibli films, My Neighbor Totoro. I know when I first watched the film, I went into it with glorious ideas, thinking it was going to be this huge epic film, and we'll see if I get crucified or not for my thoughts on the film. There are a lot of really cool elements in it. It's not a bad movie by any means. I know for me, one of the things I've learned is anytime I go into a film, I have to leave my expectations at the door. And I can't do the comparison game like I did with what we did last time, which was In This Corner of the World. And I made that mistake, and I think it's affected my thoughts on this film. It's one of those things I've got to watch, I think, again. Got to take the old Nate card and watch the movie a couple times just to digest it appropriately. But I can't wait to talk about it. I want to hear your guys' thoughts, what you thought about it. You know, how old were you when you watched this film? This was my very first time watching it off the recommendation of a lot of people. It comes in high regards. Everybody loves the film as far as I'm concerned and as far as I know. So, as you all know, I am not doing this alone. I am going to be joined by my colleagues and my brothers and sister in Christ, and we are going to jump right into it. So, with that said, let's say what's up to the panel first, and then I'll say what's up to you guys in the live chat. BK Apologist, man, how have you been doing, bro? All right, awesome. Nate 2D2, man, what's going on, bro?
Not much. Just excited to talk about this. It was a fun film, so I'm happy to see what everyone else thinks.
So am I. And Michelle, what's going on, sis? How you been doing?
I've been doing glorious, amazing, awe-inspiring to many.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, sis. Of course, now let's say what's up to some of the people in the chat, those who have joined us. DFC Diatribe, he says, I haven't watched it since I was 18. Loved it, though. Now, here's the thing. If you guys are going to say you love it, I want to know why. I want to know specifics. I want to know scenes. I want to know what it is about the film that you loved, so that way we can grow our conversation. Shout out to the Revelator, a fellow patron. Thank you for your support. He says, good evening, all. Great night. I love this film. Again, the same thing goes out to you. I want to know why. Give me details. DFC Diatribe says, didn't think it was phenomenal, but I enjoyed it. I think I'm along the same lines. And I'm actually interested to hear the rest of my team's thoughts on it. Shout out to my brother in Christ, Mr. Phil Fox, blessings family from the land of the Anishinaabe. I don't want to mess up the name. Anishinaabe and Potawatomi. All right, hopefully he'll know if he'll tell me if I messed that up to death. But thanks, Mr. Phil Fox, for being here, bro. Miss you guys. Definitely miss you. He said, I couldn't hear Alfredo. That's interesting. Alfredo, can you say something? Okay. Okay, nobody's hearing him, but let me see. I'm going to fix this real quick. Why aren't you doing this? Oh, man. Why aren't you? Oh, come on. I got to get this live. All right. BK, talk again, man.
Hello.
All right.
Hello.
If you guys can hear him now, let me know. Thank you, Phil Fox, for pointing that out. I appreciate it.
Hello.
And DFC.
We can hear you.
All right. I think he's there. Oh man, I want everybody to hear you sing. All right. So DFC, he said, let me see. I'm hitting the wrong buttons here. Anyway, before we jump into everybody's thoughts and comments, let's go around the block like we usually do. Michelle, give me your general thoughts about the film. What did you think of it?
What did I think of this movie? I thought that I think that Studio Ghibli makes movies that make you actually think about life and think about how we interact with our emotions.
Awesome. All right, everybody says loud and clear now. That's good. Okay, BK, overall thoughts of the film, bro?
Well, I mean, this season has been interesting for me because
interesting is another word for you don't like it. It sucks.
No. I mean, it's not what I'm used to. Like when I look at anime, it's usually the kung fu, the sci-fi, the blood, guts, action,
Right.
So this is a completely different side of anime that I'm not really used to watching.
Mm-hmm.
And like the last movie that we had to watch, well, I just couldn't do it, man. That was
He gave it 5 stars, y'all.
I did not. But it's different because it's not what I'm used to. So it's like when I think of anime, I'm always thinking, wizards with swords and armies floating in the air. You know what I mean? That's what I think of when I think of anime. It's like this is a whole different way of looking at it. But I did enjoy this one. I did enjoy this
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Nate, what are your thoughts in general about the film?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. Well, after you sort of expressed your thoughts after you watched it, I was like, okay, let's be interesting. I wonder how I would feel about it because I hadn't seen it since maybe I was in middle school
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. And so I can kind of see why, especially after our last episode in this corner of the world, why you might feel a certain way about this one. It's different. It is kind of slow in some ways, but I enjoyed it. I'm the kind of type of person that enjoys. I think just seeing how. I mean, from my perspective, it's interesting to see how they form a story, do films, do animation in Japan, or in a different culture, in this case in Japan, how they did it back in the 80s, how Studio Ghibli did it back in the 80s. So even from that point of view, it's interesting for me just to kind of analyze that and see how they form a story, how they use music, how they work with hand-drawn animation and stuff like that. So I'm going to be interested in something like this for a whole myriad of reasons. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good film. I think it's something I could see rewatching, and it's something I feel like I would, compared to the stuff that we have, some of the stuff we have today. I feel like I could see be good watching this with some kids, because it's pretty, in many ways it's wholesome, but obviously there's some spiritual themes in there. I think would be some good conversation that we'd have to deal with for for us coming from a Christian worldview, but I'm sure we'll get into that. But I felt it was it's a decent film.
Thank you. For me, so here's the thing. Just like I explained a little earlier on the intro, I was coming off the back of In This Corner of the World, the deep psychological connection I had with that film, how I thought it was absolute genius. And I was coming into this film almost expecting something exactly like that. And that was my mistake. This is a completely different film. And I think if I watched it again, I think without that lens, I think I could enjoy it. There were elements in this film that I truly enjoyed. I loved the relationship between the sisters. Find out it was the Fanning sisters that did the voices for the English dub. I like Dakota Fanning and Elle Fanning. They played the voices, which I thought was very interesting. I didn't know that until the credits came up. So there was a lot of really cool things. In general, like, I would give my stars early. So out of 5 stars, I would give it about like a 2.85. I thought it was good, but I think it was influenced by me watching the other film and just expecting something totally different. And plus, this Studio Ghibli films, this is probably one of the most endeared, the one that I hear people mention the most, My Neighbor Totoro. This is the one that's advertised. I think from my perspective that I've seen people advertise the most, and I had all this hype for it. I'm like, oh man, they're going to get deep. And there were some moments where they did. In the relationship with the mom and the sisters and the dad. And there's some elements in there that I thought were really good. But, again, I think expectations are a big deal. I think sometimes when we go into film, if our expectations are too high, it can actually mess up the viewing experience instead of going in there fresh, right, without thinking about it. And Nate, you're a big advocate of not watching trailers for this very purpose of it kind of sets up expectations and it spoils certain things. I think one of my favorite conversations you had was, I don't know if it was a friend of yours who went into Thor Ragnarok not even knowing that the Hulk was going to bust out of that Coliseum. Was it your friend?
Yeah, a friend from church. He doesn't watch trailers. I kind of learned it from him, and he had no idea.
Oh man. I wish I was him in the theater seeing that for the first time because that's such a shock. Like if you didn't see the trailer, that's a shock because there's no inkling until he actually starts, until the crowds start roaring. You see the green clouds and the puff of smoke, and you're like, this seems and it's kind of and I think my expectations because people have talked about this film so much is that it was like I was hyped up, and then that was the issue for me. But before I start getting into all my little details about what I liked about the film, we're gonna go around the panel, and I want to get some specifics. BK, anything in this film that in particular that stood out to you that you enjoyed about the film? What are your thoughts and details about the film?
Um, the film for me was really about the parents
Mm-hmm.
and how good they were at parenting because right the plot is these kids have to move to this new neighborhood into this new house so they could be closer to their mom who's not doing well, she's in the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and how well adjusted these two girls were. Like they were going through like levels, like at to be that young and to go through all these different changes at the same time, and for them to be so well adjusted and be in a good and happy space.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason why they were able to do that is because the parents created that space for them.
Right.
You know, and I think like, and for a moment, the dad's basically a single parent for the moment, and he's not frustrated. He's not like he takes on the task, and he is there. He is present with his children. Another thing that I appreciate about his parenting is when the children started kind of seeing into the supernatural, he didn't say, "Oh, stop, you guys, just don't be foolish." No, he embraced it and said, "No, you are seeing things that are not from this world."
Mm.
And I think that's a big deal. Now, this might be a bit of a stretch, but I think as Christians, right, if you are around children, if you are a parent or a guardian, it's important for you to foster this understanding that there's more to this world than meets the eye. And I feel like the dad really embraced it and did not make him feel foolish for seeing what they saw. And honestly, because of that, they were able to rescue the little girl. Because
Mm-hmm.
if they stopped believing in the supernatural, they would not have seen what they have saw. You know what I mean? And then once we got to know the mom and the compassion she had for the children, it's like, man, it's really about them and how they did such an amazing job raising those two little girls.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my take.
That's awesome. And there are 2 points I want to make because it ties into what you were talking about interacting with the supernatural. My first note that I have in my notebook is what the grandmother said. She said, "I used to be able to see them when I was your age." And that was talking about the little soot gremlins. And I thought it was interesting because I know when I was younger or around my family, people would say things like, I think children can see spiritual things more than adults. And maybe because of their innocence. And I find it interesting that people tend to go in that direction. And I think this film did that same thing, that childlike innocence allows them to see supernatural things. Now, I don't know how true that is. I have no idea. But this film did touch on that topic. And then the other thing that was interesting that I wanted to ask, of course, was the whole idea about ghosts and spiritual things, because I think this film does open up the conversation for a parent to speak with a child concerning the supernatural. And I think your insight into how the parents did not just dismiss them, but embraced their thoughts and their ideas and interacted with them, made them not afraid of these spiritual beings, but rather kind of put it into a context for them to grasp and understand. Now, of course,
because homie was horrible. Like he
Who?
was horrible looking.
Oh, you talking about the big dude?
Yeah,
Totoro.
he was frighteningly. But they were like, hey, 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 hey. I'm like, wow, you guys are brave. Because that was me. I would have had like 4 heart attacks. You know what I mean? So, but to your point, though, like they were conditioning, like, well, when you see these things, it's okay. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up. Michelle, any details in the film that stood out to you? Any scenes that you want to talk about or you want to pull out to explain maybe to the audience a little bit?
Yeah, so the you call them the soot gremlins. They when what's interesting about them, we seen them in Spirited Away as well.
Mm-hmm.
But in Spirited Away, like they were helping the like once they got used to her, like they were helping her in Spirited Away, and the actual adults could still see them in Spirited Away, and they actually like fed them like little pets. They're the same things
Mm-hmm.
in this movie. So I find it interesting that they even here are like more inclined to like be around kids or help the kids, just kind of how they were helping her in Spirited Away. So I found that like once I see them, I was like, they look just like the things in Spirited Away. So then I went back to Spirited Away just to make sure I wasn't going crazy, and I was not. So I thought
We're
that was
glad.
yeah, it's a touch and go sometimes. So I found that part very interesting, how they like kind of show like the spiritual world in multiple ways in their throughout their movies, because in Spirit Away she's also spirited away, for lack of a better term, into
Right.
a spiritual world. So then we see how like that spiritual world has come into the natural world as well. So like when she's there, it's like everything is the spiritual land. And but here it's not that way, but they're still interacting as if, they're coming to our realm as well. I found that interesting. And the other one I found interesting is when they were at the bus stop waiting for their dad, and their dad's bus came late.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting that, so this is why I was like, is it spiritual? Is this an imaginary friend? Because at the bus stop, they were waiting for their dad with his umbrella. So when he got off the bus, he would have his umbrella. And so Totoro came and they gave Totoro their dad's umbrella. And Totoro gave them seeds because, he gave them the umbrella. And the bus came from the cat bus, came from him, and then like he was spirited away as well. so, like I found that very interesting, because it's like anytime they felt disconnected from one of their parents, that's when Totoro would come. Because the other times that he popped up was when their mom was in the hospital and she was crying, was like, will she ever really come home? And then yeah, man, you know what it is. Can't mix your umbrellas around. Exactly.
Whatever.
So the other time that like he really came around was like when they were in like extreme distress, or when their parents, like something happened with their parents, or their dad was late, he was there. When their mom was in the hospital, and then she's like crying, she's concerned, like, will we ever really see her again? Is she even still alive? And then here comes Totoro. Like he just pops up at any time that they're in distress. And then when May was missing, he takes them to May. And but I find like after their mom comes home, and I know this is probably like you said for one scene, but they all kind of tie in.
Mm-hmm.
But when their mom comes home, like Totoro is now no longer around. He's like kind of watching from a distance. There's no need for him to like pop up anymore, because the distress they were feeling with their dad being late on the bus and their mom not being around is not as prevalent, because now both of their parents are there. And to Alfredo's point, they have good parents, so their parents are there to now watch over them, and Totoro doesn't have to kind of come in and take over that role for them. So those all the scenes like I kind of found very interesting is when he actually popped up.
I like that you mentioned the bus stop scene, because I thought that was pretty a pretty significant scene, especially with the maturity of the young girls, right? So Satsuki, which is the older sister, the fact that she had the wherewithal and the thoughtfulness to even think about her father coming home without an umbrella and able to go out there. I can't even say the word umbrella now because you guys messed it up for me. But
No, you messed it up for yourself. Do not blame
I'm
us.
blaming you guys. Anyway, so the whole umbrella issue is he was coming, and then the thoughtfulness they had to even be there for their dad. One of the things I did like about the sisters, they only had one argument the whole film. And I think the older sister, which we usually don't see in film, is the older sister actually embracing the younger sister May and being there, right? Like she didn't want her to get away from her. The only time that there was any negativity between the sisters was when the mom couldn't come home. And then she lashed out at her little sister, which we all tend to do when we're dealing with stress in life. And so I just think, and I think Nate touched to the point as well, is the maturity of the sisters and their ability to actually interact appropriately with the situation. BK talked about something that I thought was interesting, and then I'm gonna give it to Nate. When he talked about the spiritual nature again, the question I'm going to ask, and I want you guys to kind of stew over it a little bit, is let me make sure I get this question right. Is there a bad thing happening with the sisters embracing the spiritual entities that they're dealing with? Right? And because we could look at this film and say, yeah, they did a great job kind of talking to the sisters about these spiritual things, but were the spiritual things that they were interacting with, of course, we know we're not Christ-like or Christian, but, society today tends to interact with the supernatural a lot, not really knowing what it is they're interacting with. So kind of stew that in your brain a little bit. We'll come around to that again, but I want to get Nate's thoughts. What were some things that stood out for you, Nate, and things that you definitely want to make sure we mention during this conversation about My Neighbor Totoro?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question leading into me, just because that is kind of what I'm thinking about, the whole spiritual worldview of the film. And I was reflecting on what the spirituality of that they have, and kind of comparing that to Spirited Away, and wondering how much of that is part of Japanese culture, is this idea of this spirit world. And in both films, I think they mention like guardians, spirit guardians, and things like that. And so it's an interesting question that you ask about, is it good? And I that's one thing that I was already stewing upon while watching the film, because on the one hand, I'm sort of imagining when I'm watching this, as an adult, and as somebody who's is not it's grown up in the church and has kind of an understanding, obviously, that this the worldview that they're presenting is different in contrast to the Christian worldview. And sometimes you kind of have to check out and see it with enjoy the film within its own kind of realm. And I think it's similar to like when you maybe when you're watching or reading like Chronicles of Narnia or something like that, right? I mean, we understand that there isn't like those other worlds and Aslan and all that kind of stuff, but I think we can still appreciate and look at it for what it's meant to be, what it's meant to symbolize. So on the one hand, I think within the world of My Neighbor Totoro, these spirits, I think, are meant to be benevolent. And so within that understanding, I think it is good that they are, I think, embracing it. It's funny, you hear the mom saying that I think she said she liked haunted houses, or she liked the idea of haunted houses or something like that. And that's interesting. And so, yeah, you see within the film that the girls are benefiting from reaching out to the spirit world, embracing the spirit world. And so I think we can, I think, take parallels from that, and see how we can be like the Father in not dismissing that, but speaking in terms of this reality that maybe is beyond our normal thinking, our perception. But as Christians, I'm thinking we should do that more, right? Like we should be able to speak about the supernatural realm as is a real thing. I think that's something we just
Right.
don't do as much. And so that's something that I enjoyed watching, that oh, the father is speaking in these terms with these girls, and not dismissing what they perceive, what they understand. And I think that's also another interesting aspect, the idea that children can see something or understand something or perceive something that maybe the adults don't. It made me think about how Jesus approached, children in the Gospels, and how, I think the disciples tended to look down on them, and then try to, keep them away from Jesus. And what did Jesus say? Like the kingdom of heaven belongs to
Hmm.
as such as these, I think is what he says. And it sort of made me think, I wonder what kind of parallels maybe there are, that what is it about children that there is an understanding, or is there an innocence that maybe that we miss as we're an adult, as we get older, maybe become more jaded. And maybe that's something that's recognized, universally. I don't think that's something that, it doesn't mean that we should be embracing, I think the spirit world in the sense of this film, and in real life. I think it's one thing to enjoy that within the fantasy of this film. um, but I think it's I think if we're, again, I mentioned this in the beginning, watching this with kids, I think it's good to have a conversation about, how do we look at the supernatural realm, and do we, we shouldn't, like, we shouldn't be doing necessarily the same thing as they're doing, in the sense that we're looking to some kind of guardian spirits, or looking for some kind of Totoro to save us. But I think it's good to say, well, just kind of like how within the film they had these, um, beings that protected them. I mean, there is, we see from the Bible that we have our creator, we have, the angels that he sends us. And there's a lot of theological stuff, what is it, angelology or whatever, that I'm not particularly familiar with. But I think I remember reading, talking about, I think that it does mention guardian angels somehow in the Bible, right? And so that's kind of interesting stuff. And I think that's good conversation starter, I think, to have with kids. But I think, yeah, I think the thing that kind of I take away from this is, I don't really. It's funny how, as an adult, you don't think about kind of the spiritual messages or the ideas um, that maybe get implanted when you're watching these as kids. And I think, if I, when I watch this, I'm seeing all this stuff that's happening. I'm seeing them kind of make the sprouts grow, and doing all this kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
I think even as a younger person, seeing that, I'm like, okay, that's probably, something that isn't necessarily Christian. But I could kind of
Hmm.
compartmentalize that. At the same time, I can see how that might give certain impressions to kids who maybe don't have a good foundation in true spirituality. And so I think it's good to be aware of how one could be influenced, because I could see somebody watching this and then wanting to embrace something that's more maybe Eastern,
Hmm.
in terms of their spirituality. And so I think it's good to kind of parallel contrast what you see in this, and say, how does this kind of illustrate how we can engage with the supernatural realm, but in a good way, maybe not necessarily in the way they present. And I think also, I mean, I'll just end with this. I think I'd be curious to see how much of, My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away, and maybe some of the other Studio Ghibli films, how they're representing the spirituality mindset, or understanding of the Japanese culture. And I wonder how much that is part of their culture, because
Hmm.
it would be interesting to see how we could engage them um, with these ideas. Because I know that, Japan, from what I understand, is one of the most unchurched countries,
Hmm.
I think, at this point. And so that would be interesting to kind of engage with the understanding that there is a sort of spirituality in their thinking, and kind of having a Act 17 contextualizing that. But yeah, it was just interesting. It was just interesting to see how they engage with this other realm, and seek the protection or guidance of these spirit guardians, and things like that. And it just makes me wonder. I wonder how kids watching it these days, how much that would influence them, and how much that might distort their understanding, or would they, those who growing up in the church, would they understand? Okay, this is just fantasy. This is how we shouldn't how to think of it in these terms. I suppose it depends on the kids and how they think, and how much they have conversations with their parents about the Bible. But I think it's good to have those conversations, and I think this movie is probably a good way to engage in that.
It's cool that you were bringing that up, because part of my thinking process throughout this whole thing was, if a child were to engage and see something like this, right, like a Totoro or some kind of little being jumping around, it reminds me a little bit of how Satan can appear as an angel of light, right? This idea of deception, and little kids being ones that are probably more open to deception. Not more, but maybe I guess they have less protection, I think, because their minds aren't fully developed yet, and they don't probably have a great concept of scripture, and how to decipher between good spirits and evil spirits. You know what I mean? And so for me, I think this film opens up the conversation should at least, I think, initiate parents to engage with their children in spiritual discussions about spiritual reality. Because if not, something like this could happen where your child's young and they grow up and they're interacting with the spirit or a pretend friend or whatever it is. And it could be, not saying it always is, children have imaginations. But at the same time, we do have to understand that Satan walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. If you even think about how lions hunt, they go for the youngest, weakest, because they're easier to catch. You see what I'm saying? So, in a sense with our children, I think the conversation with Christians needs to be, listen, you see, like My Neighbor Totoro, you see how these little beings are doing all this stuff? That doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing, although the film portrays it in this very positive light. But if we're looking at this through a Christian lens and say, wait a minute, they're interacting with a spiritual realm that is not Christ-like, right? And so, but I think the director, and I forget his name, I don't know if it's Miyazaki, I could be messing up the name, but I think he's kind of like the George Lucas, in that he's creating these worlds and he's creating almost like an amalgamation of different religions and pulling different thoughts and ideas from different things, in the same way that George Lucas pulled and added little spiritual things from different religions into Star Wars. And of course, he pulled from Christianity. He just pulled from Eastern thought, Eastern theology, all these things to kind of create this story. And I think this film kind of does the same thing. So one of the things I had, and I wanted to ask you guys, is the world of imagination, because as a kid, I had a big imagination, and even going into like 12 years old, I still had an imagination. And I'll share a little embarrassing story. We couldn't really afford a lot of toys. So what I did was I would make a toy out of almost anything. And my little sister did the same thing. My dad would buy her all these dolls. But for some reason or another, my sister would not play with the dolls, but instead she would use a pillow and pretend that was a baby. And instead of all these other figurines, and for me, I used to play football with like an empty soda bottle in the house. So I would throw it, I would run and catch it. And I remember doing these things, and I remember how much fun it was to be a kid. And it kind of, this is one thing that the film did remind me of that I thought was cool, was what was it like to be a kid and to have this imagination kind of run wild, and how you can entertain yourself even with the simplest of objects. And so I kind of wanted to go around the panel and see if you guys are willing to share, or if it brings back any memories. Michelle, as a kid, I could imagine you having a great imagination. Was there anything that you did as far as being entertained by something simple because your imagination was so grand?
I won't say simple. I was the only child for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and I had like so I have my own playroom. So one part of my playroom was like the whole Care Bear castle, the Care Bear car, and then like another section was all Barbie. So I had a Barbie dream house, I had like a Barbie townhouse, I had the Barbie beach house, I had like the little RVs, I had a little store set up. Like even as a kid, because I had like all the little accessories. So like my Barbies was the be all that end all because and then like I would go around and they had jobs. This then that I wasn't gonna want no kids and I was gonna want to be where I am now. And so like my Barbies was like high powered, they had jobs and they were like shopping all the time and they were living their best life. They were always on the beach, which is again how I live my life now. So like I guess I've always imagined my life being like
I think we need to review
this.
Barbie. I think that's what this sounds like.
Yeah, I have made myself Barbie, but that's how like I would like and I would be okay with being like, "Hey, how are you doing today, Barbie?" "I'm doing okay." Like I would cuz I was fine with that. I was the only kid. And so like, I was used to just kind of like playing by myself. Like my mom would come in and play with me sometimes too. Um but if you let her tell her I was very demanding and it had to be played a certain way, so she really didn't want to play with me all the time. But I was used to it, so like I had to use my imagination for all my toys to just talk to each other because it was just me.
That's pretty dope. That's pretty dope. And it kind of reminds me like back in the day too, I had like a Batman figurines or action figures and I would be entertained. I'll be sitting at the kitchen table for like an hour just playing and imagining these fight scenarios and all kinds of stuff and I'll make them fight. And it was just the innocence of a child being able to just be entertained with something so simple. Whereas now I think as adults, we're so inundated with entertainment that I think we kind of lost our imagination a little bit. And that's just my opinion. And that the ability to be entertained with the simple, I think is being overshadowed by the distractions like social media, films, movies, all these things that we need to be excessively stimulated in order to feel any kind of entertainment. Whereas when we were younger, when things were simpler, we were entertained with something simple. So, BK, did you have an imagination as a kid, man?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, um, it's funny, right? The way I even got into comic books was interesting because I didn't know nothing about comic books. What
Hmm.
happened was my neighbor had a stack. I guess they didn't want it anymore, so they just went to my house, knocked on my door, and gave me a pile of comic books,
Hmm.
and that's how I got into it. And I was a big Star Wars fan, and but I would repurpose my action figures because I was also a Marvel fan, but I didn't really have the money to buy the Marvel figures, and they haven't really came out with any good ones at that time yet. So C-3PO became Iron Man, and I would do these different things, and yeah, man, it was because you love what you saw on TV and what you read in comic books. Like you want to recreate those moments with your action figures,
Hmm.
and it helped to develop some really great storytelling ability, which I've been able to utilize as an apologist to explain certain things. It stems from having a vivid imagination as a child. So
That's a really cool point, and I like to see 3PO becoming Iron Man. I think that was a nice transition. I think that was dope. But like what you talked about, it kind of relating to you as an adult, like when you have an imagination and you have the freedom to exercise that imagination, you can do things like what Jesus did in scripture, which is to tell stories, right? To give analogies. That's something that my wife loves. My wife loves an analogy, just because it makes the complicated simple, and it helps us to grasp certain things. So yeah, definitely, I definitely feel you on that, man. Nate, did you have an imagination as a kid? If so, do you have a story to share with us?
Yeah, no, I think just like anyone else, I would use my imagination to create worlds. Or I think I was sort of like Andy in Toy Story. You take all these different toys from different properties, or it could be a He-Man, it could be Jin, and I don't know what else. I think I had a Captain America action figure as well, and you just make up stories with them, and you just, I don't know. It's funny the things that you come up with when you're a kid. I sort of envy that, the ability to be creative and things like that. And I used to have a lot of stuffed animals that I would keep in my bed with me. And I think in my mind, they all had their own kind of personality and name. And I think sometimes that would even play out in my dreams, because they're right there with me when I'm sleeping. And yeah, and even on the playground, you think about all the stuff that you come up with. It's funny. Actually, I was thinking about this while watching this film. I used to watch, what is it, the Gummy Bears cartoon that was on Disney Afternoon. And there's a character on there, I forget the name, but it's like a grandpa gummy or whatever, and he has like magic spells and stuff like that. And I remember my friend and we were like first or second grade or something. He had actually bought me this kind of notepad, the kind of it's like a small little notepad, you flip it over and you can write stuff in it. It's kind of like stuff you would see like an old a journalist writing in, when he's taking his notes in like maybe before I don't know how they do it now, but you know what I mean, like those little notepads. He bought me one of those from the student store, and we just, I think, kind of taking from the kind of the spells they would do in the Gummy Bears, we would just come up with all these different spells. We just write them down as if that somehow it was real, and be like, oh, there's a speed spells. I'm writing it down, so we can run really fast or something, or we can do this and that in the playground. And so yeah, we come up with all kind of crazy stuff that I think just to kind of express the ideas that we had in our head. And yeah, it's funny what a child can think of, and just the creativity and the way they, I think, express their desires and values through their imagination. I think I didn't always have a lot of friends, growing up. So I think maybe that's part of the reason why you kind of imagine, oh, my stuffed animals, my friends, this is my family, my group, and you feel like you're part of something. And so, or even just the idea of being able to do magic spells or whatever. Maybe you feel like you can be extraordinary that way. And so, yeah, I definitely would just think of different ways to entertain myself. And yeah, it's interesting to think about that, and just think about how kids can just take very simple things and occupy their times. I think it's a little different now with all the devices, but yeah, definitely.
I think it's interesting, right? Because we're all talking about, the influences, like with BK with the comic books, me with action figures, Michelle with Barbie, you with these things. And you start to think, like, how much of an impact do films, movies, cartoons, does it have on a child? It kind of shapes them in a sense. And I think one of the things I want to make sure I say, like, during the stream, although some of the things we used to play with and do are not necessarily biblical, it's a good thing to learn from, because it shows how much something like for example, you were talking about the Care Bears and you were casting spells, and I was playing Batman, or acting like I was beating up everything, being aggressive, and so forth and so on. And you start to take on these characteristics of the characters and the things like that. And as a kid, it's fun, right? You're not necessarily thinking, oh, I'm doing something that Christ doesn't like. You know what I mean? If a kid pretends to be Harry Potter, I don't think that kid understands the gravity of witchcraft, right? So I think it's on the onus of the parent to be able to educate the child and tell them, hey, listen, this character is doing this, and this is not necessarily a good thing. But just to explain it to them, not dismiss them and just take it away, but rather to educate them. And and I think it's important, because as much as we talk on when it comes to real reviews, and the reason why we use film, because it does open up a conversation for us to talk about Christ. It also opens up a conversation for us to talk about morality, what's good, what's evil, so forth and so on, because so many people have been interacting with film, me being one of them. I grew up on movies. I've watched movies since I was a kid. I remember sitting on the floor in the Bronx watching RoboCop with my dad. That's not a kid's film when you go back and look. But I remember watching it, and all these things like The Never Ending Story was another one that it was one of the films that I really loved.
I love that movie.
Yeah, it was dope. And all these things. But I think sometimes, even as adults, I think we can get lost in the magic, the quote unquote magic of it all, in that it's entertaining. It makes us have emotions and feel things and so forth and so on. And sometimes some of that stuff can get past us. And sometimes when you're not watching with intention, you can actually get caught up in things that are not necessarily good. And so I think it's really cool that we have a platform like this in which we're able to have conversations about this, because I want parents to become a little more aware of what their children are watching. I want them to become more aware, all right? Because it can, like I said, even as adults, it gets past us sometimes because we're so entertained. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. But thank you, Nate, for sharing that. So we're going to go to the comments section, see what people have been talking about, and try to interact with that a little bit. And then we're going to wrap it up with our final thoughts and our rating on the film. So Revelator007 says, make up stories and adventures with G.I. Joe and the $6 Million Man, the originals. Also built cities and vehicles with Legos. Nice. Mr. Phil Fox, he says, I used to make cities out of cardboard boxes for my G.I. Joes. The true American hero, huh, Mr. Phil Fox? Let me see. Revelator, he says, we watch too much television, go outside and enjoy nature, detox from all the electronics. Read a good book and let your imagination go wild. Are you trying to convict me, man? Nah.
But here's the thing, though, with that. So in My Neighbor Totoro,
Uh-huh.
they did go outside and they were worshiping nature. So it's like, is that really
That is
because
true.
he was outside bowing down to the tree until the tree grew. So it's like, is it really safe outside too? I mean, anything can happen anywhere.
That
Revelator, anything can happen anywhere.
that is true, and I'm glad you kind of brought that up, because the father did lead his daughters into tree worship and nature worship. Totally forgot about. I'm glad you brought that up. I totally forgot about that scene. But yeah, I think what he means, and I know he means this too, is that we have been kind of inundated with so much technology, and that we forgot to go outside. I know for me, I grew up during the period when video games were just becoming popular, but I would only play video games like later in the day. But in the morning and the afternoon, I was outside playing and jumping, and then I would come back and play video games or something. There was that a little bit of that balance. As I got older, of course, I stopped playing, out there in the jungle gyms and stuff like that. I started just playing full throttle video games. And I think this generation is now in the moment where you rarely see kids outside. You rarely see them in the park, unless they're real young and they're with their parents and the parents are taking them out there. But I remember I used to try to fight to get outside. It wasn't like my dad had to take me to the park. I was like, yo, I want to go outside. Let me out. Let me out. But yeah. Revelator, let me see what else. Warrior Woman. Warrior Woman, what's going on, sis? I always like it when she shows up. She says, going to continue listening in my car. All right. Be safe on the road, sis. She says hello to everyone. She added everybody. So say what's up to her. She says, hey, all. So Christ brings a sword, brings up interesting thing. And I want to see if we want to talk about this a little bit. Cancer is a merciful disease, as it gives a person time to reflect and decide if there is an escape. Now, there are two ways to kind of think about this. Cancer, I don't think is merciful, but I think depending on the severity, the aggression, some people do have the time to reflect a little bit. But cancer is rough, man. I work with clients all the time who have cancer, and it is a rough thing. But like you said, it's not an instant death, I guess. I guess that's the point you're making, whether it's an instant death. But it is pretty painful. But in reflection, because the film, does the film ever say that she does have cancer, or is it like we just don't know what the disease is? what do you guys think? Did the film mention it? Did I miss it, or we just don't know what happened? Nate, Michelle, BK.
Did anybody see the original without the subs? Could maybe we would get more context from that. Because from the version I saw, she just was sick, but they never said what the element actually was.
Right. Yeah, I saw the English dub, so that was the one I watched because it was on Peacock. So yeah, I don't remember them saying it was cancer, but it could be inferred, right? Like you can almost, I think maybe they left it nebulous so that people could relate and put any disease in that place.
Right.
I think sometimes movies do that. They let you, relate to the film in that way. Revelator says it makes a reference. If you know a specific, I guess, quote or scene, just to make it clear to me. But I don't remember. I don't remember it making a reference to cancer. But maybe it does. Maybe it does. Maybe I missed it. Um, yeah. So
Now I'm saying like in the original without the dub, like the original
like the
voice.
actual Japanese anime.
Right.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe because sometimes there is things that are lost in translation when it goes over to the English dub. Um, so maybe. But thank you for your.
I did watch it in
Okay.
Japanese, but I didn't glean anything that indicated what her disease
Oh,
was.
okay.
So I don't know.
All right. Okay. Cool. All
I
right.
did too, Nate, and I can't remember anything about cancer.
All right. Cool. I'm just making sure I didn't miss something because I thought that would have been a big thing for me to miss. But okay, so with that said, let's get into our final thoughts and then wrap up with our stars. Even though I'll just say my star, I said it earlier, 2.85. I'll probably get crucified by every My Neighbor is Totoro fan out there. I'm willing to just take the hit. Uh, but Michelle, let's start with your final thoughts on the film, what people should take away, and your star rating.
My final thoughts is Totoro reminds me of Snorlax, and the bus reminds me of
That's
Meowth.
interesting. Yeah, it does look like
And
Snorlax.
he does, and that bus reminds me of Meowth. And then the little white one that jumped on him reminds me of Mew. And that's all I could
Ah,
think of when I was watching them. Like I never like, and I've watched this movie when I was younger, and I was like, I don't know how I miss these people look like Pokemon. So that is my that's my overall thought on it. It is children playing Pokemon before Ash Ketchum start trying to domesticate them.
so this
Um,
this came out before Pokemon, right?
I believe so. Yeah, because the
Okay.
original Pokemon thing came out like in the early '90s,
I wonder if
and
there
this
was
came
some
out like yeah.
influence. Yeah, that's
But
interesting.
he does look like Snorlax, and that's
Yeah.
all I could think of. And I would say I'll give it a 3.5 out of 5. I really like My Neighbor Totoro. Um, I like the themes of it. I like how it does show how children deal with things emotionally
Hmm.
and how they don't always express how they feel in a way that we would as adults, but they still express how they feel in other ways. And I think their dad was very in tune with how they express their feelings with their mom being in a hospital, with him being a professor and having to go to work. Like I think that's how they kind of like express their feelings. So it does make you think if you like raising children, you have children, like how are ways that you can interact with your children that you can kind of like rein in their emotions and to teach them how to be emotionally intelligent and
Hmm.
teach them how to express their emotions in a healthy way. Um, that will help them become healthier emotional adults. So I enjoyed the movie.
Awesome. Thank you for your thoughts. Okay, BK. Final thoughts. What should people take away from this film, and then of course your rating.
Again, it wasn't the kind of anime I like watching, but it was fine for what it was. Uh, I guess my thing is the supernatural is real, but unlike the movie, don't indulge in it. Now, I'm all for the supernatural. I'm Mr. Divine Council, Nephilim, into all that. I don't want to see none of these jokers though. You know what I mean? I respect that realm. That realm does what it needs to do. I do what I need to do in this realm, and I'll cross over when it's time. Hopefully, not anytime soon. But yeah, supernatural is real. But man, leave that stuff alone. Do not do not open doors you cannot close. You know what I mean? And then my rating about 2.5 stars.
Okay, okay,
2.5.
awesome.
So,
And you
so
know,
Plato's the reason that they say, "Be not afraid when angels talk."
Right, exactly.
and don't let BK's warning kind of just fly under the radar. It's a very stern warning. Don't interact with supernatural things that you have no idea what you're dealing with, because God tells us to stay away from that stuff for a reason, not because it doesn't exist, but because it does. Okay. So we have to be able to decipher things and using the word of God to decipher. So I'm glad you made that warning, and thank you for that, BK.
For sure.
Nate, your final thoughts on the film, what people should take away, and your ultimate rating.
So my rating, I think it's probably 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Mm-hmm.
I I I did enjoy watching this film. I think it's a beautiful film. I don't know what it looked like back in the day, but I'm watching it on Blu-ray, and I think they probably digitally remastered it or
Mm-hmm.
restored it or whatever, and it looks good for a film from I think it's 1988, I believe,
Hmm.
when it came out. So was it?
88.
Yeah. So it looks good, and so I think from that standpoint, it's a good showcase, I think, for anime. And I think this is I feel like it's a good film to watch with your kids. I think, like BK alluded to earlier, I like the attitude of the sisters. I like their
Mm-hmm.
relationship. I like the way that the older sister took care of the younger sister, and also was kind of aware of the situation with the mom, and trying to be mature about it, and excuse me, oh, frog in my throat. um and being thoughtful of the dad and stuff like that, trying to bring him the umbrella, things like that. I like that they inject that kind of uh uh thoughtfulness and care in the child protagonist, because you don't a lot of the, I think, films, whether it's animated or whatnot, where you have kids being um the kind of the point of view, in later films. A lot of times it's, they're the parents are just, stupid, and the kids have to come in and save the day or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
there's kind of this attitude of, oh, the kids have to be the ones to be the heroes or whatever, that because the parents suck or whatever, and it's just like, that's not what this is. This shows you kind of, there's a situation, the dad's doing what he has to do, the mom has to be in the hospital, but they can step up, they can still be kids, they can still have their imagination. But the older sister, she can still take care of the younger one. She can take care of her dad, the way she wants, or the way that she did. And they just, there's this whole family dynamic, and they're working together. And I think from that standpoint, it's good to watch this. And I think, because I know as a kid, I would watch whatever I watch, it would affect the way it would affect my sense of morality, my ethics, the way I interacted with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine watching this as, if I had, I'm an only child, but I could sort of imagine if I had watched this as a kid, and maybe if I was in a similar situation, I had a younger sibling, maybe my mom was sick, I could see myself thinking, okay, I have to be like this. I have to take care of them. I have to think about, what my dad needs and things like that. And so I like the fact that they have that kind of dynamic in this film. So that's why I would recommend this as something to watch, with younger kids, and then have that conversation about the spirituality, because you don't want them to have a wrong idea about what the spiritual realm is. Give them a little credit, though. I mean, I think kids are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. People think that you're gonna if they let them watch like Harry Potter, that they're gonna want to get into like real
Right.
rich witchcraft. I don't think so. I think a lot of kids, some of them maybe, but I think a lot of them, they just understand, they compartmentalize, they understand that this is fantasy. And you may need to kind of guide them a little bit more, so that they don't get wrong ideas. But I think kids are a lot smarter also than we give them credit for. So we don't necessarily have to, protect them from these things. I think maybe just kind of insulate, guide, direct, and have the conversations. But yeah, I actually think this is given a lot of the stuff that they put out these days. I think this is a good throwback to kind of have in your library. And if you don't have kids yet, or maybe if they're getting to the point of where they can watch more films, this may be a good one to introduce and sit down and watch with them and create memories watching this. I can see people having, I imagine a lot of people had a lot of nostalgia about this. I think that's why it's so popular. I think among our generation, I think so. But yeah, I definitely recommend this. With the caveats that everyone has brought up. So yeah, I think I said 3.5 out of 5 stars, maybe 3.75, depends. But
okay, not too shabby. So thank you for that. So for me, of course, I give it a 2.85, but I think if I watched it again without the expectations, it'll go up to maybe a 3. I don't see it going past 3 for me. One thing I would say that we should take away from this film, similar to or echoing what BK was saying, and that we want to make sure that we don't interact with spiritual things or spiritual realm or spiritual beings, especially if you don't have any concept of that when it comes to Christ and what he says, because he tells us to stay away from these things for a reason. Like I said earlier, that's not because it doesn't exist, but because there is a spiritual nature. There are things out there, spiritual beings out there that are looking to harm us. And that's very apparent in scripture. And I think Nate alluded to it, is that we don't talk about these things enough. We tend to over intellectualize, I think, things, and we don't accept what we actually read about in scripture. I think we glaze over some of the spiritual things in scripture, and we don't actually stop and pause and say, wait a minute, this man was inhabited by how many spiritual demons? Wait a minute, let's sit down and talk about what that means. We just say, oh, he was just a madman. And then we just keep on going and reading the rest of the scripture. But you don't think, wait a minute, there are spiritual demonic forces out there that are looking to harm. And so I think we need to be, number one, prepared biblically. Of course, my thing is the best way to have a solid relationship with Christ is, number one, read his word, try to understand it, and pray to God to help you understand it, because that's God revealing himself to us. And he's teaching us about what's happening in this world. This is why God is our objective moral law giver. He is telling us what is right and wrong, because if left to our own devices, we will start making up our own morality. That's where you get subjective morality from, where either whoever has the most power, whoever has the biggest numbers, that's how we dictate what's right and wrong. But whereas when it comes to God, it doesn't matter if it's 1 against a million. God's word will always stand as true, and we always have to stand on the side with God. So in order to interact with God and to be able to rightly reject spiritual demonic forces, you have to know scripture. You have to, as some people would say, be prayed up. But in other words, just have a real solid relationship with Christ, and he'll protect you from the things you need to be protected from. For me, that's the one thing I would say take away from this film. Do I think it's a film that kids should watch? I think it's a film that kids should watch with their parents, and their parents should watch it first, introduce it to them, talk to them about it, so that they're not going in there blind, because it is a kids movie. And, the spirits are attractive and fun to look at, colorful. But remember, like I said earlier, Satan can come as an angel of light and start to interact with your children, and that's scary. So make sure you guys are, being watchful and very good parents. Anyway, Corrence Chandler, I guess he's saying hello, what's up? And then Revelator, he says, always be read up and prayed up. You never know what evil will come for you. I think you summed it up pretty nicely. Thank you for that. And with that said, I want to say thank you all for tuning into Real Reviews. If you want to help us grow, you want these conversations to reach more people, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button. The more times you hit the like button, the more comments you leave under the video, the more YouTube pushes it out to more and more people. If you don't leave any comments, then it's just going to stay with us, and I don't want it to just stay with us. With that said, before I go, I want to also announce that the next film that we're going to be talking about is Yasuke. Now, I think this one's going to be a little more in line with what BK expected from anime.
Mhm.
And so,
Finally,
yeah, finally we get to
man.
a BK film. Yasuke is, I just pulled it up. I just wanted to read a quick little synopsis just to get everybody kind of ready for it. Because number one, I haven't seen it yet. I wanted to kind of get it fresh in the mind. And let me pull it up. Okay. So in 1579, an African man, now known by the name of Yasuke, arrived in Japan. Much about him remains a mystery. It's unconfirmed which country in Africa he hailed from, and there is no verifiable record of his life after 1582. But Yasuke was a real-life black samurai who served under Oda Nobunaga, one of the most important feudal lords in Japanese history and a unifier of the country. And he is also the inspiration for Netflix's new anime series Yasuke. So that's the one we're going to be reviewing next. I expect BK will probably give this a higher score.
Yep.
But we're definitely going to
Five
get into
stars
it.
right now.
You 5 stars already, right?
Mhm.
So it's on Netflix. If you guys want to watch it ahead of time, make sure you guys get ready. We're going to be talking about it next week. I believe, Nate, I know you saw it. Is it how many episodes? 6?
I believe it's 6 episodes. I think they're about half an hour each.
Oh, yeah,
so,
we'll be able to get through that pretty quick. So make sure you guys watch it, and we will see you on the next review. God bless, and thanks for tuning in. Peace.